Good morning and a Freilich Chanukah. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're middle of page 1271. Aleph Resh Ayin Aleph. So we finished the middle paragraph, and let me sum up. Because as I mentioned in the previous class, the last 10 pages, really from page 1261 all the way 1261 all the way here to 1271, has been about first answering the question, how could such a high dimension of tainug atzmi be achieved through our avodah when it's completely beyond the shtalshelus? Like he says, and he answered simcha shal mitzvah, because simcha shakes things up and broadens and expands the boundaries and the horizons that allows us to reach these higher levels, and explains simcha together with mitzvah. That was a discussion that went from 1261 through 1266. And then at the bottom of 1266, he said, we still need to understand, even with Simcha Shal Mitzvah and Ava Rabba B'Tainugim and all these high levels of Avodah, we still, how do you get to the Etzem when you're dealing with Kalim? There's still the parameters of existence at the end of the day, even if they're completely expanded. Simcha Shal Mitzvah doesn't mean we completely eliminate the boundaries. It means it breaks through and allows us to go to places that the regular structure would not allow us. So on page 1267, he introduced that the root of the Kalim is higher than the root of the Eidos. So you see a very logical and eloquent building up structure. And since the root of the Kalim are rooted all the way in the Etzem, that the Shimu is higher than the Kav, rooted all the way in the Etzem, all the way in Helam HaAtzmi. So when we work with the Kalim, we're actually, in a sense, accessing those highest levels. Then when you combine that with Simcha Shal Mitzvah, like what he says, that's why through Simcha Shal Mitzvah, which is Dafke and Kalim, this final element, together with the Simcha, together with the introduction of, and Mitzvahs, and together with the introduction of Etzem HaNeshama, Ava B'chol Meidecha, now we have the whole picture complete. All this combined allows us to access the highest levels in Etzem, and bring it down into our existence in a revealed way. And each piece of the Avodah does another aspect of it. But the final piece of the puzzle here was the Kalim, rooted all the way in those highest levels. Okay, that's what we concluded in this paragraph on page 1271. In summation, that is. Just to repeat again, the parentheses, he said that similarly you could also do through mitzvahs and Kabbalah sale, which also draws from the Sheiresh HaMitzvahs, but the main Hamshach is through Ava Rabbah, because then you bring the Ratzon Atzmi into Makim, into space, where you see again the interface, the central theme of Ayin Beis, the interface between the highest and the lowest, between the divine and existence. And here we also beginning to see the explanation of Ein Oid, that post-Tzimtzum reality in Seder Shtalshlus, with all its structures, can access without obliterating and annihilating the structures, can access pre-Tzimtzum consciousness all the way up to these highest levels. And these are all the tools that we've been learning how to achieve that. Now, this comes following much discussion in volume 2 about the transformation of the Tzimtzum, that we're transforming it. We're transforming it because the whole purpose of the concealment was in order for there to be revelation. And the whole point of revelation was there to be a tzimtzum, so we should be able to receive that revelation. So all this is in addition to that main key point, that transformation of the tzimtzum is through the avodah that we do. We don't have avodah, the tzimtzum is dominant in order for us to exist. But our avodah is able to expand the structure, allow the kalim to receive more air, allow the tzimtzum to be recognized as being simply a stepping stone toward higher revelation. And then when you talk about the kalim being rooted in the etzem, and you bring simcha shal mitzvah into the picture, and you bring ava Rabbi b'tainugim b'chol meidechem mesiras nefesh etzma neshama, that leads us all the way up to the highest levels of the cognitive and the emotional, all being absorbed in the all-consuming love of God. You have the whole picture of entire existence, even though initially it began as a concealed state, divine state. Now it's experiencing the divine, the highest levels, and in a revealed way. Okay. Now you returned back to the conversation about Gan Eden, which is 10 pages ago, in this next paragraph. Does anybody want to ask anything before I go to the next paragraph? Okay. So if you go back 10 pages to Aleph Reish Samach to 1260, before he went into the discussion of how do we get beyond, how do we get a revelation beyond Seder Shtalshlus? So if you remember, just to refresh our memories, he spoke about Gan Eden on its own, Atzei Havaya, the trees of Havaya, so it's a level of Havaya higher than Elokim, it's higher revelation. And then Yizbu Atzei Havaya, that the trees of Havaya should be sated and filled, and that's through Avodah. La'avda l'shamra, as Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve are told, he placed them in Gan Eden, la'avda, to serve and to protect, and make the garden bear much more fruit than it would do on its own natural state. What that means is through our Aveda, we create a higher energy, all the way drawing from the Etzem. And that's where the whole question began. How do you draw from the Etzem when we're still in the level of Ishtalshlus? And at the end of the day, Gan Eden is Bria, the world of Bria, which is lower than Atzilus. And that was explained through Simcha Shel Mitzvah and everything I just discussed. But prior to that, that was the whole discussion of Nefesh Seveya Tovus Nefesh, that we get to a level that a Nefesh Seveya, a filled, a sated soul, tramples on and disregards honeycomb and the honey, because it's Hanachmodim Mizav and Mesukim Midvash. You're reaching a level that's even sweeter than honey, and more precious and more valuable than gold. As he explained, this is the level of Tainug Atzmi, Bilti Murgish. But there won't be no eating and no drinking, because you'll be in a level that's beyond being sated. It's not even a level where you could say, I'm hungry and I get filled, as we discussed there at length. The level that's higher than Bidurim. I'm just going backwards right now. And this all was in addition to what Gan Eden is, Vayita Havaya Gan Eden. He planted a garden, Havaya Lekim, and then higher than that is the Avodah, that it causes the Gan Eden to become sated and even higher levels, all the way to the highest levels of Tainug Atzmi. Now, that began on page 1254. So I'm going backwards, 1254 to 1260, which is essentially 6 pages, was discussing Gan Eden, where he went back, and that was after the long discussion before that about the Mutfa, Murgish, and Muskel, and the Biti, Achesi, Imi, the different levels of elevation, all the way to the highest levels that we discussed. Neshama is being mashpia into Torah. But I'm not going to go that summary. I'm just putting the flow, because since he's now going back, and we're going back to another so-called section, he's returning back to the discussion of Gan Eden. I just wanted to put things into context. So now, we continue. The next paragraph on page 1271, and these pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Valpi kola now, and according to all of the above, Yuvan will be understood be inyan amshachas teis v'seir b'Gan Eden. Now we'll go back and better understand the hamshacha, the transmission of the abundant, the increased energies in Gan Eden, which came. How does that happen? Not on its own. Shezeu aydei ma'isa mitzvahs dafka. That's the whole point of Avodah. La'avda l'shamra. Remember, la'avda ramach mitzvahs esed, the 248 positive mitzvahs. L'shamra is 365 negative mitzvahs. So it's through ma'isa mitzvahs that we achieve this taste v'seir. Not the regular flow, but an increased flow, an abundant flow. Like we said, Yizbu. Now he's also going. Okay, before I read the next line, now if we go back, all the way back to when he began this whole discussion of Gan Eden, long before Mutve, Murgish, and Muskel. So he says like this. You go back, I just want to connect all the dots here, because if not, you can get very lost here. So if you go back all the way before Mutve, Murgish, and Muskel, the three levels of the growth of emotions and the maturation. So I'll tell you what page I'm looking at. Even earlier. Okay. If you look at the bottom of page 1220, we're talking about 50 pages back. If you look at the bottom of page 1220, that was where the transition went over from Gan Eden and schar mitzvahs and reward of mitzvahs into the whole flow of this process of the maturing of our emotions and growth of cognitive, emotional, cognitive, which led us to where we are now. Now, if you go back there, you'll see that there's Gan Eden on its own, as we learned. There's the avodah that adds energy, but there was a discussion back on page, a bunch of questions that he asked. I'm going back even earlier right now. To page 1211. That was after Havaya Chatu Merivov. So he started Lahavin calls that Tzarech Lahavin HaHafresh. Then Gan Eden Le'elam Haba on page 1211. To understand the difference between Gan Eden and Le'elam Haba. And if you look there, he says, you do it, the Gan Eden Nimshach Teisver Ser Tomid Aydei Maisa Mitzvahs Be'elam Haza. Dafke Kashanasim Kavanah V'rusa Deliba. And he began discussing what exactly is Gan Eden, what does the Avodah do, and what is the reward. And he asked the question, since the main work is in this world, in this physical world, you can't say that ultimately Gan Eden achieves the full reward, because Gan Eden is spiritual. At the bottom of that page. So on page 1211 and 1212, he asked a series of questions of what exactly is schar mitzvah. Is it a spiritual reward? Is it a physical reward? And also, whether we get all this reward in this world, or like schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka. In this world, we don't get the schar, it's only in Gan Eden. But then he asked, we find many of verses that talk about getting reward in this world. The bottom of page 1212. If you follow the mitzvahs, you'll be rewarded. And the things that you receive, but he said, the five Elo Advarim, these are the things that a person eats of their fruit in this world. And the principle remains preserved in the world to come. So all these questions are asked, what is going on? Where do you get the reward, and where's the levels of reward? So in order to explain that, he went into Gan Eden, but ultimately he wants to go back to understanding what exactly is the relationship between our work and the reward we receive, or basically the divine revelation that comes through our efforts. And the difference between the part of the mitzvah, which is the actionable part, and the intention, which is a spiritual part. No, it's Kavanah mitzvahs, he explained there, the intention, like from Tanya, can be mamshech from ruchnius, because intention is essentially a spiritual thing. It's not tangible. But like Ava and Yira. But the physical mitzvah is a physical one. So going back to that whole discussion, what's the difference between the physical and the spiritual? Which in different words, the difference in kalim and oiris. So after everything we've learned now, we can go back and understand now all the aspects of how a person's avodah, what it generates, and in which world, and understanding the difference in kalim and oiris. This is all what he's going to now tie together. So really going back now all the way back to page 1211, which we're talking about literally 60 pages back. So in truth, to really understand what we're learning here, I have to go back and refresh our memories from what we learned there. But I'll first read this, and I'll refer back to there, back and forth, until we get it right. So what we're reading now is really, like I said, is really a conclusion or answers to questions that were asked 60 pages ago. So it's critical to state that. And then we'll understand, why do we need 60 pages? Why couldn't he just answer this question right away? You'll see that evolve as we go. We'll see the richness of how the Rebbe Rashab built a whole case of literally 60 pages just to explain the concept, but you'll see how each of the pages was relevant to get to understand the picture in the fullest sense of the word, which, as I've mentioned many times, is the approach of Chassidus Chabad. It's the derech harucha ktsara, the long, short road. It doesn't start with a question and gives you a quick answer. It builds, because the Chassidus wants to give us not answers to questions, but a perspective, a full perspective. Look at Tanya. In the beginning of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe asks a bunch of questions. Where does he begin answering them? 12, 13, 14 chapters later, literally. So when you begin to learn Tanya the first time, it's very disconcerting in a way, because you're not used to that. Usually a question is asked, okay, give me a little introduction, a page, 2 pages, 3 pages. But 14 chapters later, that would be like a speaker asking questions, and 14 hours later, it's not even hours, it could be 14 weeks later, 14 years later, he starts answering. So that's called the untrained mind, and more the less mature mind, it's overwhelming. But the truth is, Chassidus is doing that because it wants to give us the full picture. And if we'd go the other way around and just give you, here's the question, here's the answer, we wouldn't understand the whole picture. We would get, like I always pointed out, there's 2 ways to teach. One is to ask questions and give you the answers. Another is to teach you how to find the answers. And that's only possible if you understand the process, if you understand the dynamics of how you got to that answer. So what would you prefer to learn from your teacher? Answers or how to answer questions? In other words, not just teaching you what to think, but what to think, but how to think. Methodology. And that's fundamental to Chassidus Chabad, because it's trying to train us to think different, to act different, to speak differently. And that's only possible with a full reconditioning of the human being, which is essentially what this whole discussion is about. The conditioning going as we grow from child to adult, from less developed emotions to more developed emotions, all the way to these highest levels. So this is exactly the approach of Chassidus. I just wanted to give a little background, because to understand why this is done. It's not meant to make it difficult. On the contrary, it's meant to really give us a picture, a bigger picture, so we can really understand how this works in the fullest sense of the word. Okay, so I will be going back and forth, because these are answers to questions that were asked back then. So let's read back to page 1271, and I will refer back to those pages as he's answering these questions. Okay. It says like this. While people are now you've been I'm sure to say beginner should they might a mitzvahs daf. Ub Kavanah a mitzvah ub the rusa the liber lavad ein mamshichim b'chinas teis. So the first statement has to be made that all this is coming through the actual performance of mitzvahs. If only a person only had intention and they didn't do the mitzvah, let's say you have the intention of binding your mind and your heart. Right? You're binding your mind and your heart, but you don't actually put on film. Or on Shabbos, you're thinking about the elevation of all the worlds to the higher spiritual levels, but you're not actually keeping Shabbos, God forbid. What does that mean? You're lacking the actual mitzvah, so therefore you'll not be mamshech teis v'seir Gan Eden. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab said. If you go back now, I want to just refer you to this page here. Just a second, I'm just trying to. I'm referring back to page where he spoke about this. He actually said it very explicitly, that if you have the Kavanah, I think it's page 1212. So he says like this. Yeah. He says there that Gan Eden because it's the er mamala kalaman, which means the divine energy within the structure of existence, higher than the regular world, but still within. So there, ruchnius is enough. Kavanah is enough in Gan Eden. So he says these, I just want to read the actual words. Im lo yeh chas v'shalom ha'maisa b'poel mamish lo yamshich klum lo yikabel shum schar. If a person has kavanah, but he doesn't have the actual performance of the mitzvah, he wasn't mamshich anything. Nevertheless, the hamshach is totally not just in the action, but totally hamshacha, but kavanah she'im ha'maisa. That you need the kavanah and the maisa. Similar to what we spoke about simcha shal mitzvah. What did he say? If you only have simcha, you don't have the real hamshacha atzmis. If you only have the mitzvah, you don't have the gilui. So the same thing with kavanah and mitzvah, you need both. But now he's going back to that theme. He says, "Kasher ma'isa mitzvah si b'kavanah oz dafke nimshachai teis v'ser b'Gan Eden." Yeah. So now back to here, 1271. So he says, with the kavanah of the mitzvah and ru'usa deliba, which is the rotzen, the desire in the heart, alone, ein mamshichim b'chinas teis v'seirus. You don't draw down these abundant, these extra increased energies. Because God's intention, the inner core of God's, of the higher rotzen, is not the kavanah. It's the actual doing of the mitzvah. Remember, we spoke about why the kelim are rooted in the highest level, because the kavanah is not the oir just to transmit energy. It's to build a mishkan, it's to build kelim. So when you build a house, all the intentions that are important in building the house, all the deeper intentions, but the bottom line, if the house is not built, safe ma'asav machshavat tchila, you didn't fulfill the real kavanah. So he says clearly, ma'asav mitzvahs hi pnimius atzmus rotzna elyon. That's what the inner and core desire of God is above. Valkein hein gamkein b'chinas hamshacha. And therefore, I guess what he means in gamkein b'chinas hamshacha, it means that these ma'asav mitzvahs draw down the hamshacha of all these things because that's the kavanah. Like we spoke before about kelim, that kelim draw down the energy because that's the intention, but that's where the energy should go. Mashenkin to usa deliba. By contrast, however, the desire of the heart in a state of avarabba alone, he b'chinas halah, right? So he means here not just hamshacha, what I just said. He means going back. If you remember, he said that simcha, for example, alone is only halah. Same thing, rusa deliba and avarabba is about your love for God. And what does that cause? That causes you to want to be absorbed in godliness. You spoke about this at length earlier, that alone is not the kavanah. The kavanah is shuv, to go down to this world and through maisa, through actions, to change this world. So rusa deliba b'chinas avarabba b'chinas halah. That's in a state of elevation. So that's one thing. That's one mile of maisa mitzvahs over the kavanah, rusa deliba. Obviously, as I said, and we'll soon say, kavanah with the maisa mitzvah is the ultimate. But if you put them side by side, kavanah alone is going upward. Mitzvahs are going downward. You're performing what God wants you to do. Kavanah is more your connection to God, which is about you cleaving and connecting. Another thing that mitzvah, maisa mitzvah has that kavanah doesn't have on its own, v'gam sha'mitzvah akeli lekabel er ha'atzmi the ein sof. The mitzvah is the container. It's going back now to container to receive the core divine energy of ein sof. Your mitzvahs are very expansive. They're very wide and expansive. Canal. And as we learned earlier, What does it mean they're expansive? It means they're capable of being very wide containers to receive the Oyer and Gili. Because what else does it mean? I mean, literally it means that mitzvahs are very broad. But he's specifically spelling them out here, that mitzvahs are Rechava mitzvahsechem ha'oid. He did say that earlier. I think he brought that expression even. I think it was, maybe he didn't. But the concept for sure, he said, so mitzvahs are kelim. But now comes, so what's the role of Kavanah? Kavanah alone, yes, is spiritual. It's like someone saying, I'm a good person at heart, a good Jew at heart. No, it has to come down into action. That's the Kavanah. Dira b'tachtein ma'aseh has to come down to action. And that's the Kavanah atzmis. Without the action, you don't have the Hamshach. However, in order for there to be the Hamshach, but he means here, not just connecting, but drawing it down in a revealed way, Sarechli is b'chinas ha-Kavanah. We need to have the level of intention. In other words, not just do mitzvahs more mechanically, but with intention. Hainu, haveda der usud liba ubchinas simcha shal mitzvah. Usud liba means with the desire of the heart. In other words, with passion and deeper emotion, and with joy, the joy of mitzvah. Shazeu ba'aveda da'avarabba b'tainugim dafke kanal. And this is specifically in the highest level, the aveda of avarabba, the great love, out of delights, out of pleasures that we spoke about earlier, which is the highest level of aveda. So on its own, you're not mamshi, you don't reach that level. But with the Maisa mitzvah, and now you have the Kavanah, as he just spelled out, all the way to the Usad Liba, Simcha Sham mitzvah, which is connected with the Avar Rabba B'Tainugim, and then Dafke. When you have that as well, in addition to the action, what's nimshach, what's drawn down, is the revelation of this core energy. And without this kavanah, you will not have the hamshacha. You reach that essential place, but it will remain in a state of concealment because it won't be part of who you are. It will be like, it's like someone doing the actual kalim. We said the kalim are rooted in that highest place, but you won't have the full revelation and the full experience of it. As he actually explained earlier when he spoke about Simcha Shal Mitzvah, on bottom of page 1264, he more or less said similar language, if you look there. It remains behelim, that's what he said. Like helam ha'atzmi. And you want the helam ha'atzmi to come out in a revealed way. Ukamoshin is barleil. Okay, he spells it out specifically, explicitly. And as was explained earlier, shetzrichim liyashneim dafka. You need both. You need the mitzvah, the action, and you need the kavanah, and all the levels of the kavanah he just described. And now he's going to answer the question that was asked on page 1212. I even have it marked here. Ubezen nicha, mashin is barleil. Now, nicha is a language more in nigla, but once in a while you'll find it in Chassidus, but it's not so common. Ubezen nicha means, and with this, we'll resolve. Nicha also comes from the word like menucha. We'll come to resolution, to peace. Bezen nicha, with this we'll resolve, mashin is barleil, what was explained earlier, now where's earlier, page 1212, that the transmission of the energy, of the divine energy in Gan Eden, that's through the intention and through inner work, meaning the inner work of a person connecting emotionally and spiritually and in the level of Ru'usa Deliba and all these levels he's talking, Ava, Rabba, B'Tainugim, Ru'usa Deliba, B'Siris Nefesh, B'Chol Moedecha. But we ask the question, so why are you saying that Hamshachas Ha'er is through Kavanah in Gan Eden? Isn't it true that really the Hamshach of Atzmus, of the highest level of Atzmus, is through Aveda Begashmias. It's through Aveda Dafka physical, in the physical world. But Maisa Mitzvahs, in actual physical action, actionable mitzvahs. Shazeo Yisur Matan Teira ala Mitzvah Shalavas. As he explained back then. That's the advantage, that's what Matan Teira accomplished. Matan Teira was not a small event, it was historical. But the Ovis did mitzvahs already before. So we're told that Ovis did them Beruchnius, not Begashmis. That's the Chiddush of Matan Teira, that it brought the Torah into Gashmis, that you could change this world. Maisa mitzvahs. Actual physical mitzvahs. Besides bris milah, besides the mitzvah of circumcision, the Ovis did not do physical mitzvahs. Everything was in the spiritual realm. So how do you say that the Kavanah is the Kavanah brings into Gan Eden? Says the answer is this is the nicha. The shnei emes, both are true. The transmission, meaning the actual reaching that highest level, is dafka through the action ma'isa mitzvahs, the action of mitzvahs. And just during ruchnis the kaveda, the others did not mamshech atzmus. They were mamshech giluyim. As we learned in volume 1, they drew down the er hagvul, shadai, not havaya shmi havaya lenadaiti lehem. They were able to clean the pipes, as we discussed, to realign existence to the way it was in the beginning of creation. They eliminated the sins, the toxins, the pollution, the corruption. But what did they draw down? That belongs in the structure of Seder Shtalshus, not Etzem. Matan Teira was Mamshech Atzmus. So the Rebbe Sham now qualifies, what about the fact that Ovis Hoyelhem Gamkin Uvdos? The fact is the Ovis also did actions. They didn't do everything only spiritual. Kamoy Hachnosa Sarchim. They invited guests. Ube'eres. And they dug wells. Umakles. By Yaakov. To basically bring Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Hachnosa Sarchim from Avram. I mean, all of us did it, but especially Avram. Be'eres, but Yitzchak and Avram began, but Yitzchak continued digging wells. Umakles are the rods that Yaakov used when he bred the sheep of Lavan. The Gami Krivu Karbonis. And they also brought offerings. So you can't say it's completely spiritual. So the Rebbe Rashab says, qualifies the be'emes, because in truth, avodah ruchnius amitis, a true avodah ruchnius, ef shaliyas bli eza uvda b'maisis, is not really possible. It's not possible without some tfisa, something that holds on to gashmis. But the primary avodah was ruchnius. So yes, they did physical things. That's not what in other words, he's saying they weren't just in spiritual meditative mode and only spiritual feelings and so on. They did physical things, but it's not the mitzvahs as it was by Matan Teira. Matan Teira, the mitzvahs were given, mitzvah v'esa, these are the mitzvahs you have to do, and dafke begashmias. By the Ovis, it was primarily ruchnias, but the ruchnias also had some hold in the physical world. That's what he's saying here. So what do we see from this? He's talking about both things are true. So the first thing is that we must have Maisa Mitzvahs. The Hamshacha of Etzem can only be through the action. It can't be through Kavanah alone. But nevertheless, but nevertheless, the Eirer will Hamshach is Galus Eira Atzmus, to stimulate and to draw down the revelation of this high Etzem, level of Etzem, Kudafke Ide Hagdomes Haveda de B'chinas Ava Rabba. It's only Dafke after you preface Aveda of Ava Rabba, like we spoke, the powerful love, the great love for godliness. Like he says in Tanya, in chapter 4. What does he say? That you can't really preserve and do mitzvahs if there's no love for God. You can do actions? Yeah, you can do actions mechanically. And does it touch the etzem? It touches the etzem. But to really say that it's integrated and internalized and something that you'll perpetuate, you can also easily drop it because it wasn't completely revealed within you. Whereas the kavanah of Ava that prefaces the mitzvahs, then you know that the mitzvahs will really permeate you. So you have the etzem from the Maisa mitzvahs, and the kavanah creates this galus. Now, what about the other way around? Just like he spoke before, Kavanah without Maisa does not reach Etzem. What about Maisa without Kavanah? Or b'Maisa mitzvah levad. The action of a mitzvah alone, gam kishi b'chinas kabol sel malchus shamayim. Even when it's done with complete acceptance of the yoke of heaven. In other words, you're doing it, like he said earlier, you're completely accepting God's sovereignty. I'm not sure what's a gam kishi b'chinas kabol sel malchus shamayim. I'm not sure whether Amitis goes in Kabbalah sells Malchus Shamayim or on Ha'oir. I think on Ha'oir. I think it's like this. So even when it's Kabbalah sells Malchus Shamayim, nevertheless, Amitis Ha'oir hu behelam. Unless you read Kabbalah sells Malchus Amitis. Either way, Ha'oir hu behelam, the energy remains concealed. The Eina Meir begilui, and it does not radiate and illuminate in a revealed way. So the Maisa Mitzvah is true. It reaches the Etzem, but it can remain concealed. It will remain concealed, and it does not radiate begilui. And since it doesn't radiate begilui, here comes now Gan Eden. And that's why it will not cause an abundance and increased energy in Gan Eden Elyon. It'll reach the Etzem, but you're not going to have the Giluyim of Gan Eden Elyon. And here we have the real answer. Why do we need Gan Eden if you reach the Etzem? Because we want it to be begilui. And that's where Gan Eden stores that energy, the gili of the energy, not just that it remains concealed in the etzem. That's the whole point of Seder Ishtalshlus. Like we learned, it's not just about reaching the kalim, reaching the etzem. It's also that we should integrate it in the Ishtalshlus. That existence should experience it, not just reach it, because we want to transform existence, not annihilate existence. And that's the whole point, that after the tzimtzum, we should have the gili before the tzimtzum, but not in a way that the tzimtzum is obliterated. In the structures, we should expand them, and we should be able to reach the etzem and bring the gili. So you need both, and which explains the whole discussion of all the stages of emotional growth and maturation and development, because you need us to become kalim telekus. It's not just enough to say you live in this world, you do a mitzvah and you connect to etzem. That is true, but we want us to be able to internalize it, that your meichin and your midas, your mind, your emotions, from childhood on, develops, is trained, is conditioned to become also a container to receive all of this. In addition, of course, that is coming from the etzem. So that's why you need both. And that's the answer to the question. The Amshachas Er Gan Eden Kavanah, even though the Kavanah is Amshachas Atzmus through Maisa Mitzvos, but Maisa Mitzvos without the Kavanah, you have the etzem, but you don't have the begili. So in a way, you can say the following: why was Matan Torah not given in the beginning of creation? If the whole kavanah, the whole purpose of existence, as Rashi brings right in the beginning of Chumash, Bereshis, Beis Reshis, Bishvil HaTorah, Bishvil Yisrael. The whole purpose of existence is Torah. The Gemara says that it was when Matan Torah happened, Eretz Yara v'Shakota, until that point, the earth trembled because it knew its whole existence was dependent on the Jews receiving the Torah, the Neshamas receiving the Torah. And that's v'Shakota. Once they received the Torah, the contract was ratified, and the world could be at peace because its purpose was fulfilled. So there's a klotz kasha here. Simple question: if the whole purpose of existence is Torah, why was the Torah not given to Adam and Chava? It could have been said, he put them in Gan Eden. They should serve and protect. So give them the Torah. Matan Torah should happen right then and then. Or if it's not Matan Torah, give them the Torah. Why do we have to say they did the Torah even before it was given? That's what it says. Kimu kol ha-Torah kaidim shenitna. Adam and Chava la'ovda l'shamra. We said 248 positive mitzvahs, 365 negative. So, but it's still not Matan Torah, it's still spiritual. Primarily spiritual, as we just learned. Why not give them the Torah, the full Torah? Why does it have to wait literally 2,448 years? That's the year that Torah was given. 26 generations. If you think about it, it's almost half of the time of history. We're now in the year 5,782. What's 2,448? It's something like 3,333 years ago, 3,334. So it's not literally half, but literally for over 2 millennia, 2.5 millennia almost, there was no Torah. Why not? The Ovis, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Shvatim. So one of the answers is understood from this whole discussion. Because before Matan Torah, the Eibishter wanted that this should be done in a natural way. He didn't want to just give them a gift, here's Torah. Wanted people to earn it. Because you can ask the same question about the very development of a human being. Since the whole purpose is that a person should fulfill Torah mitzvahs, so why are we born as babies? Why not be born a 20-year-old, like Adam and Chava, or at least bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah, and you right away mechuyev mitzvahs? Why do you need all the stages? 9 months of pregnancy, and the infancy, and then the early adolescence, early young child, and then growing into all the different terms. You get the idea. And then bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah, then adolescence, and teenage, and all that. Why do we need that? Why not just let a person be an adult? Because then it wouldn't be us. It would be from above. The Eibishter wanted that we should begin from scratch. Yes, Mashbiyan Esei Tehit Tzadik B'al Tehit Rasha, we're given all the resources. We're taught the entire Torah in our mother's womb, but it's all made to be forgotten consciously. So we have the resources, but now you have to do the work. That's called chinuch, educating, conditioning, training, because then you become a real keli. If the Eibishter gave us the Torah and then we just start, you did not earn your way. The Eibishter wants us to earn it, that it should be bepnimius. Basically, that we should be able to be begili, not just the etzem of it. So as an effect, it says that before Matan Torah, the generations were like before Bar Mitzvah. The Torah and mitzvahs before Matan Torah was like chinuch, but in a macrocosm. The microcosm is each individual. Before Matan Torah, our lives are before Bar Mitzvah and Bas Mitzvah. Like Bar Mitzvah, Bas Mitzvah is like our personal Matan Torah. Now you've matured to the point where you, like we've learned, you move from the emotional to the cognitive, and now you're responsible for your actions. Now your parents are not responsible for you anymore, and you continue to grow. Ben Chamesh leMikra, Ben Eser leMishnah, Ben Chamesh Eser leGemara, Ben Shmin Eser leChuppah, Ben Eser leKoyach, and so on. So what happens is that you've now earned it. It's become you. When you do a mitzvah when you're 13 or 12 years old, you're not just doing because you were told to do. You've come to appreciate it to some extent. And as you continue to grow, you own it more and more and more. It's not just a lekei avesenu, it's a lekei nu. It's internalized. And then 26 generations of chesed, nizunim b'chazdish al kadosh baruch hu, God's giving a chesed to the world. Now they received it after the hard-earned effort of 210 years of suffering in Mitzrayim and becoming a nation that came with a lot of pain and oppression. You have earned your way. Now when you say Nasa v'nishma, it's real. It's not just, a baby saying it. You've developed and you've appreciated it. So actually the Ovis and all the generations before Matan Torah were essentially preparing the ground for the day that the etzem could be nimshach. And then when the etzem is nimshach, you need all that, because that's the Kavanah that allows us to internalize it personally. So in an interesting way, it started first with Kavanah, with Ava of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the Ovis, and then it led to Maisa mitzvahs in the full sense of the word by Matan Torah. But now when we do mitzvahs, we have to have both as well. We have to have the action that reaches the etzem, and that's why Gan Eden comes into play. Because you can say, if we do mitzvahs here, why do we need the whole Seder Shtalshlus? Why do we need Yetzirah and Bria and Atzilus and Gan Eden HaTachton, Gan Eden HaElyon, and all the levels? We are reaching etzem, because the whole point is it should be etzem within you, internalized. And actually the process began first, the internalization by training, conditioning, education, the Ava, that led to the etzem, and now the etzem needs the Ava, which is the Kavanah, and you have both sides. So that's what he says here, that even Kabbalah said the would be the Helam, Maisa mitzvahs alone will not increase energy in Gan Eden Elyon. I'm just skipping the parentheses because I just want to finish the sentence. In order for there to be the revelation in the higher Gan Eden, the higher Gan Eden is where the real revelation is more than the lower Gan Eden, like we learned also earlier, the difference between the two Kavanahs back on page 1212. He says, you need both. The Aveda with great love, and the action of the mitzvah in actuality, b'poel mamish, an actual mitzvah, the simcha shal mitzvah, with the simcha shal mitzvah, which also adds to the inner kavanah and the simcha, not just doing it, but with joy. So I'm going to read the parentheses in a moment, but I just wanted to sum up. So therefore, what we have here is such a powerful way of understanding holy shtalshlus, the role of Gan Eden, even though Gan Eden alone is the kavanah, because it's not Maisa, but you need the Kavanah. You need Gan Eden as a stepping stone, as a preparation and a stepping stone. Ultimately, you need both to have the full revelation of the Etzem in this world. Now, the parentheses, let me read the parentheses, then I'll stop for questions. In the parentheses, he says, Rakla'osid, Yi Agili. So he says, from Maisa mitzvahs, you don't have the taste of the extra energies in Gan Eden Elyon. The only thing is la'osid yagili mepnei shel la'osid kol helam yizgala begili mamish u'kamoshi yizbar. So 1 second, la'osid lave, which is higher than Gan Eden, he says the gili will be there because la'osid, everything that was concealed will be revealed. Now, what does he mean by that? Does he mean that you don't need Gan Eden? He means to say that la'osid lave, there'll be another dimension will come into play, that the helam ha'atzmi, that Maisa Mitzvahs touches, every concealment will be revealed. You could also say he means that it will reveal these energies that are stored in Gan Eden now, like in a chest, and not revealed. But I think he means you'll be the Helam Yizgalav, you'll be Gilim Mamish, the highest levels, even higher than the Giluyim of Gan Eden. So this is going to be explained. And now, before Mashiach comes, Haschar al zeh began Eden hatachten, shuschar hamaisa b'kabbalah sel malchus shamayim. The reward for it is in Gan Eden hatachten, which is the schar for the action when you do it b'kabbalah sel malchus shamayim. Now, what does that mean? He just said that in Gan Eden you only have the ruchnis. So for that, I have to go back to page 1211 and 1212 where he explained this a bit. So in other words, when we do a mitzvah below, even an action mitzvah, it besides touching the Etzem, it also generates energy in Gan Eden. When you do it with Kabbalah Sale, it generates an energy in Gan Eden. However, when you do it with a Kavanah, it reveals it in Gan Eden Elyon. I believe that's more or less what he said earlier. But I don't want to go into that right now. I'll do that next class. This parentheses, I'll go in more depth. Just wanted to distinguish, and we have to really learn back there to understand this parentheses better. But the point at the end of this is that we need both. Gan Eden plays the role that it's the place where the Gili takes place, and the Asad Lavi will have all the qualities, obviously. Okay. So, any questions?
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. I cannot remember the name of the mimer, but I think it was a Shavuot mimer for the Rabbi, that he was explaining the difference between action before Matan Torah of Mitzvot and after. And then my understanding was that let's say Yaakov Avinu, when he was doing the tefillin, the mitzvah tefillin with the sticks, while he was doing it, those sticks had the kedusha in them. But as soon as he was done and he put it away, the kedusha would be gone. Versus after Matan Torah, when we put on tefillin, let's say, even after we take it off, the kedusha still stays in it. And I thought that was the really main difference between the mitzvot, the ta'asef before Matan Torah and after, as the Rebbe brings it down.
I can give you another 20 differences between Matan Torah and before and after. Here, we're focusing on this mimer, what he says here. He doesn't bring that here because it's not relevant here. But obviously it's connected to other Maimarim. But as you know, my approach is always to learn what he says here. And what he said here is that the Etzem comes down by Matan Torah, and before Matan Torah, you only had the Ruchnias, the Gilui of it. That's the main difference. Are there other differences? Yeah, there are that derivatives that come out of that primary distinction. But the main chiddush is the hamshachas ha'etzem.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
So when the Chumash says that Rashi says that they're having the Avos are having a Pesach Seder. In that case, that was one of the few cases.
It was only symbolic and only beruchnius.
But it seems like they were talking about that they were eating this, eating that, and then it seemed more than that.
But also,
where I read it.
It's only symbolism and ruchnius. That's a fact. That's the fact. Remember, the Jews didn't leave Egypt yet. So what were they commemorating?
I don't know. I just really thought they were really doing some sort of rudimentary physical eating.
It's called symbolic and spiritual, but not the full physical experience after Matan Torah.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question, which it's a little off. It's a little off the content, but I think it's relevant. But if not, we can talk about it offline. So please feel free to defer the question. What is happening in the Seder Hishtalshalus in terms of Bevias HaMashiach, with coming of Mashiach, in terms of like what does it take, or what is the manifestations in terms of the energies and the revelation of light relative to what we just talked about in this paragraph, and to the point where we get Mashiach? Do you understand the question?
This is the whole theme. We'll be learning about it as we go.
So it's coming up.
First of all, it's already been discussed. He's already discussed the difference between Gan Eden and Olam Haba. If you go back to page 1211, and he'll be developing it even further as we go. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Remember, it's all about revealing godliness in this world. That's the avodah that we do. We're talking about what levels of godliness we're revealing. So really, it comes down to really that, a total fusion between matter and spirit, between divine and existence. The whole interface of Ayin Beis is an interface between what? Between God and existence. What do you think L'Asid Lavi is? Is when all of that will be totally fused and total integration. But there are a lot of stages to get there, which is what we're learning here.
But like, okay, so when the Rebbe said it's time for Mashiach, like all the prerequisites for Bevias and Mashiach have already been accomplished.
That I would reserve for another discussion, because we're learning now Ayin Beis, where he's talking about the dynamics, and then we could talk about what did the Rebbe mean by that. I've given many. I've given over 100 talks about that in the last few years. Yeah, that's another discussion.
Can that be found on your website, an essay or something?
Everything can be found. There's nothing that I've done that's not on our website.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. I've talked about that extensively. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Why did the Avishter make it so that the Tosos or that's accomplished when we do both together, the Simcha Shel Mitzvah with the Kavanah, Ba'ava Rava, why did he make it so that the Giloi of Atzmus is stored away in Gan Eden Elyon? We live in Olam Hazeh Tachton. Why did he do that? Why, if he had made it so that we could see the Giloi, which I think was Dora Day, I think, if I recall, they saw the immediate response of their mitzvahs and averas. They died or got the mitzvah in real joy. Why did he make it so, it made it so hard, so to speak, that we don't see the payrolls of our actions in this world, Bagash Olam Hazeh Gashmi Lamata, rather than stored away in Gan Eden?
You don't have an answer to that question?
I mean, I would think that so because it makes it harder for us, and we're more lishma, because we're more Kabbalah old.
That's one side of it. That's in one side of it. The other side of it is you have to earn the revelation. It's not just because you do a mitzvah, you have to become a keli for it. We learned earlier that there were those that did have a taste of it. Elam chatir b'chayecha. That means they tasted Gan Eden. The others hitimon ba'elam haba. If you look at earlier pages, he spoke about those that had a taste of it. So a taste people have. That taste is possible. for those that have earned it. But for the full revelation requires the transformation of this world into a dira b'tachtenim, and then we'll have all the revelation. Secondly, Gan Eden is not stored away on some planet. Gan Eden is right here where we are. Those that live in a Gan Eden level feel it. It's just that we don't. It's not a matter of hiding it from us. You have to open your eyes. You have to be a very spiritual person to experience spirituality. So right now, yes, the gift is given that you can do a mitzvah and generate and connect to etzem and even create a gili with a kavanah, but it's still for you to be able to experience it, you need to earn it. And that itself is an avodah to earn it. So it's not a matter of hiding it from us only. It's also a matter of have we earned that right to be able to see that type of gili, elikus. And ultimately we will see it. That's what the Asilov is all about. Geula, And Rebbe Rashab cried, why does Hashem appear to Avram? It doesn't appear to me. So clearly, we all, even great souls, yearn to see. Part of the avodah is to yearn. Then we learn about chelas ava, about kiloyan, the thirst. Tzama nafshi. We need to have that thirst. That's part of the avodah. If you give people something without them fully earning it, what happens is they will take it for granted and destroy it. The example of the Levitzog Baditchever of Shabbos Chazayin, the first two temples were destroyed, like the two garments that the king gave his son that he ended up tearing. So the third Beis Hamikdash, God says, the king says, this time I'll show it to you, I won't give it to you, and earn your way. So all this is part of the avodah in Golus. Is the only way for us to really connect is that we should really own it. We need to feel the thirst. If every mitzvah we did, we were quenched, you never really continue doing the avodah quite the same way. You mentioned that as well before.
I hear what you're saying there. Last part, yeah. Because you would think that when you do a mitzvah,
Shaina Rabbi, Tavshim Amdalad. Shaina Rabbi, 1983, the Rebbe was crying. We all know with such tears about why the Eibishter is still holding Jews in Golos. What's the purpose? Doesn't make any sense that a Jew should be in Golos. And the Rebbe said the only reason could be, and he said it through tears, sobbing, was because then we'll shraim et anemes. We'll cry out with anemes. There's sikhs about this. So that's one aspect of it. But that's not the only aspect. The aspect is because the process is you have to really internalize it. And that takes work. Why was the Beis Hamikdash, why was the second temple destroyed? It says sinas chinam. So explain this to me. God is revealed in the temple. These are high souls. And yet they couldn't get along with each other. Sinas chinam. So what would be the point to reveal to them Gan Eden when you don't get along with each other? Same thing now. It's not a matter of reward and punishment like we'll give you a cookie because you behaved. You need to be a truly godly person. If you want to see godliness, you need to be godly. It's not just, I did a mitzvah, show me godliness. It doesn't work that way. Now, there are times we see, sometimes we see some reward and some blessing. I'm not saying you don't, but in the full sense of it, it's part of the work is that you need to be complete relationship with Eibishter, That's what he's saying here, that Ma'aseh Mitzvos is not enough. Okay.
And one more quick question. When you said the analogy or so what, that it's interesting that for almost half or 40% of the history of mankind, we didn't have a Torah, and you compared it to like children growing up, and then at bar mitzvah they get the Torah. But how would you expect, except for Yechidim Segulim like the Avos and Nawach, how would you expect the masses of people for the first 2,448 years to live properly if God didn't give them the instruction book of what they should do? They just have to makabin it, come out on their own. So,
first of all, who says it was expected? Avram Avinu earned his way. He was a singular individual who came to it on his own. And the fact that he was a pioneer and he did not have a shul to go to, and which maybe had been a mile actually. There was no religious bureaucracy. He did not have anywhere to go to, and he had to completely generate it from within. Is a tremendous echad haya Avram. That's why he's so singled out. As far as others go, the few individuals like Enosh and others that did behave morally and ethically, that was great accomplishments. So the expectation was that for them to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach that was given to them from Adam HaRishon. From the beginning, they were given 6 laws. Then a 7th law was added after Noach, Avram and Achai. They were given 6 laws, and it was expected. This was passed on to them from God. That was what the people were expected to be moral and ethical. By the Mabul, it was clear that they were not. But it's true, they were like children. They were considered to be like children, and therefore they needed to go through a maturity process. And the fact that Avram pioneered this way, and then he passed it on to his children and his children's children, that prepared the ground of a people. Avram was Av HaMoin Goyim. God says the blessings that you will receive, Hamavarach Mizbarach, everyone who blesses you shall be blessed. You will bring blessing to this world. You'll be a blessing. Was because Avram earned his way, and he pioneered single-handedly with Sarah monotheism and ethics, and tzedakah, mishpat, virtue and justice, and he affected many people. He was, Magayer Sa'anoshim and Magayer Sa'anoshim. They converted, and conversion, not halacha conversion, but they transformed a pagan society to becoming somewhat believers, and affected some. And that's the process of education. That was taking a raw, untamed world and turning it into something that would become the beginnings, that would finally, by Matan Torah, come to fruition, where God says, here's my mandate to the human race. You're ready now to hear my word, the Torah mitzvahs, not just the Sheva mitzvahs, but the whole Torah mitzvahs and the full relationship. So it's like the early stages of education, training, priming, taming this untamed world and preparing the ground. Like I explained, like in volume 1, he explains at length how the ovis cleaned the pipe, so to speak. So we know from Basi Legani, the Medrash Shiur Hashirim Rabbah, Ika Shechina b'tachtainim haisa, right? Basi Legani, the Shechina was down below. The sins caused the Shechina to be concealed. Avram began reversing the process. 7 generations later was Matan Torah and the Mishkan. You have that story. You've learned it many times. Just think about what you've learned in this context. So human beings were given a chance. They were given what they have to do. They messed up. And then human beings like Avram reversed the process and began revealing the divine until the world was ready to receive Matan Torah. It earned its way. It became bar mitzvah. But even after Matan Torah, the work was still cut out. That was a gift we were given Torah. Now, it's already thousands of years since then. It's over 3,300 years later, and we're still working with the Torah to refine the world in the fullest sense of the word. So the Aveda didn't finish. When we talk about the Rebbe, where the Rebbe said that the Aveda didn't finish, as I said, I'll talk about that another time. But all this is part of that process. So yes, after thousands of years, we have tremendous amount of stored energy in Gan Eden from all the mitzvahs and the kavanahs that were done. We have the etzem, but what the final step is when all that will be revealed, the etzem begili, that will be when Mashiach comes. And yes, the Rebbe did say we're on the threshold, and we have to open our eyes and be able to experience it in the fullest sense of the word. But all these thousands of years did refine this world and make it a keli for a lakus, both atzmus and all the revealed levels, so it should be internalized and integrated. That's the general picture.
Square.
Okay, so we'll stop here at the bottom of page 1271. We'll still have to explain the parentheses.